So today was almost Lies My Pastor Told Me sermon series, but it wasn't quite, because the sermon that is normally done on this sort of service or about the Sabbath isn't really a lie. There's nothing about it that's wrong. It's just not applicable. Well, let me walk you through. What is the normal sermon that is normally said by the normal Lutheran pastor on the Sunday? Looks something like this. The Sabbath is a good thing, folks. You are human. You've got to rest. Rest is good. God went ahead and even took the day off at the end of creation. It has been part of what it means to be human, so please go and rest. Okay. That's a good sermon. There's nothing about that that's wrong. And the Bible absolutely says that all humans need rest, and that rest is, in fact, a moral good thing, and that we should take rest. And if we're not, you really ought to. However, in all my years of ministry, I found very few people who fight me and say, no, rest is bad, or fight me and say, no, I'm against Sabbath. What I do find, however, is not that people are against Sabbath or think that rest is bad. But I got a whole bunch of folks, and I bet this is true of y'all, is if I went ahead and asked y'all, who here would like to have more hours in a day, raise your hand. Everyone's gonna raise their hand. Who here, if someone came to you and said, for absolute free, whatever you're gonna do for the next 4 hours, I will just take care of, go take a nap, or do whatever you want, who here is gonna say no? No one. Everyone's gonna be like, yeah, I'm on board. Here's my children, just take them, I'm out of here. Right? Okay? It is not that we don't get as a society that rest is good. It is not that we don't get as a society that Sabbath is part of what we need. It is not that we are lacking in the wanting to have rest. The problem is we all know we want rest. We all know we need rest. We all know that rest is a good thing. We just have no clue how to get it. This is a great example when I talk about spirituality and theology, where you are entering a spiritual question, and therefore you've got to leave theology behind. Theology is great at answering right, wrong, creating boundaries, borders, black, white, ought to and ought not to, but it can't do nuance. So when you're dealing with issues of harmony or balance, it's not the realm of theology, it's the realm of spirituality. See, when you're talking about taking adequate Sabbath, on one end of the spectrum is a workaholic. Theology tells us don't do that. Okay? If you're truly a workaholic, that sermon you used to hear is really important to make sure you hear today. Rest is good. On the other end of the spectrum is laziness. Okay, now, I'll be honest, I can count the amount of workaholics, true workaholics, on one hand that I've met in my life. I can count the total number of actually true lazy people on one hand also. I find that most people are neither lazy or workaholics. They're somewhere in between. But we all fear being labeled one or the other. See, finding proper rest and proper Sabbath is about balance and harmony. It's about finding the middle ground between the two. And honestly, because it's an issue of spirituality, as your life ebbs and flows, as jobs and responsibilities come and go and change and evolve, it means that balance is an ever-changing point, which is what makes this so hard. What makes this even harder is I think most of us dread mistaking rest for laziness. We are so scared of becoming that one person we met that one time who was truly lazy, right? We're very scared we'll get labeled it by others. I think that happens for an interesting reason. Now I'm about to go down a rabbit hole of theory for a second. So if I lose you, do not worry. When I step over here, I'm going to give you an example. So if you get to the point that you're I'm lost, don't worry. I will pull you back when I stand over there. So here's the thing. I think a big part of this is the natural state of being. And I mean it this way. Every generation that comes along, because we are progressing towards God's kingdom, looks around and looks at the world they're born into and says, I can do better than my parents at fill in the blanks. And then that generation works to retoggle how they invest their time, what they think is important, to try to make the world a better place. Every generation here went through that, right? Silence, you wanted to make a place better than the World War I generation that grew you up. Boomers, you wanted to do better than World War II. Xers, you wanted to do better than the silent or the boomers that were your parents. Millennials, you wanted to do better than the silents or the boomers that were your parents. Gen Zs, you want to do better than your current millennial or Gen X parents, right? You want the world to be better when you left than when you showed up. And that usually starts to boil down to certain areas. The problem is older generations, and you can track this all the way back to the 1840s. I can find you newspapers about the young, lazy generation. Okay? It's so easy to say, well, I parented and I was able to keep the house spotlessly clean and I was able to keep the yard absolutely perfect. And not realize that the definition of parenting might have changed. And therefore you look at them and say, well, I could do all that and these other 7 things they're not doing. Man, that other generation is lazy. And that other generation feels it and works harder and harder trying to not be labeled lazy when they're working just as hard as you were, just differently. So now that I've done a whole bunch of theory and lost half of y'all, let's give you an example. The example of parenting. I think this is a good one because every generation that is sitting here that is alive has made the same declaration in regards to parenting, which is I'm going to parent better than my parents' generation parented. For example, let's take the time machine. We're going to go all the way back to the time silent gens and baby boomers were children. Okay, so I don't exist yet. Okay? This is my parents, one of my grandparents' generations. Back then, the World War I and World War II generations, which would have been your parents as baby boomers, if you asked them what it meant, how would they know if they were a successful parent? Their answers, and we know this from polling, would have been, I put a roof over my child's head, my child did not end up in jail, my child grew up to have a job, and did not have a kid out of wedlock. And then they would have stared for a second, gone, yeah, that's about it. Oh, they're alive, they didn't die. That generation meant that. For example, do you realize it is not until 1962 that it is illegal in the United States to beat your child? We're not talking spanking, corporal punishment. No. We're talking straight up beating your child. In 1961, you could do that as long as you didn't kill him. That was the line. Don't kill him. That's terrifying. That's horrible. That is awful. The boomer and silent generation grew up with that reality and said, dang it, I'm not going to hit my kids. God bless them for doing that. And they said, you know what? I'm going to up the standard of parenting. I'm going to go ahead and not just make sure they have a roof over their head, but they get 3 meals. I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what? Hitting or beating your child, that is wrong, that is bad. In fact, we're going to make that illegal. You know what? We're going to have a PSA that tells you your child is a human. You should hug them once a day. And by the way, if it's 10 o'clock and you haven't checked in with them, you should probably make sure they're home and not like dead. You think I'm joking? Google, okay, when you leave or if you get bored in the sermon at some point, Google PSA, have you hugged your child today? From 1975 to 1989, it is a whole little jingle. You can watch it on YouTube or any other place in which they remind everyone your child is a human, they have feelings, make sure you hug them at least once a day. And then there's another PSA they used to say, and a lot of you remember this, I remember this even as a child, it's 10 p.m., do you know where your child is? In case you lost him or forgot you had him. Right? Now, this was the boomer generation pulling standards up from their parents. This is not bad. But you know what? That also meant the boomers spent a lot less time, particularly dads, at the lodge, which also was probably not so bad than their former generation, but they took a lot of heat for that. Boomer moms took a lot of heat because you should walk by with the white glove. And you failed if anyone, yes, you're laughing because I bet you had parents or in-laws that did this to you. My mom had a mother who did this. She'd come with a white glove and check the top of every bookshelf like somehow the dust on the top of the bookshelf was going to get you. I'm very glad my mom, instead of doing that, made sure I was alive. Okay? Because the generations moved it forward. Now, as Gen Xers, I'm a Zennial, so I sort of stand between the millennials and Gen X. As the Gen X and millennials came along, we said, well, you know what? It's probably good that we hug our child every day, but maybe we can do a little better than just check the mark, hugged kid, moving on. And so let's acknowledge their feelings. Not just say, yes, you are human, but you don't matter. Go, yes, you're human, and you do in fact matter. And your feelings matter, and your opinions matter. And I want to talk to you about your day. And then actually show that I cared and listened. And as that role of parent grew, which I truly believe is part of God's kingdom coming, we are called to always see each other as more and more human, children included. We continued to back off on things that didn't matter as much. The yard care, the house cleaning, the things that didn't matter as much. We went to games. Go ask a baby boomer if their parents went to any of their games and watch them laugh. Went to any of their recitals, any of their plays. No. World's generation was never going to do that. It would have looked at you like you're nuts if you'd asked. We've made the world better, each generation standing on the other one's shoulders. But it leaves this arena for older generations to look at younger generations and say, dude, I parented and did the yard and did that. Why can't you, you lazy person? Now, I'm not just picking on the boomers and the silents and the current older generations, because this has happened generation after generation after generation. For example, silents, do you know that there were newspaper articles referred to you as reefer smoking beatniks when you were children? Boomers, you were long-haired hippie freaks with no ambition at all. Okay? And Gen Xers, you guys were the Beavis and Butthead generation, followed by us millennials, who were the me generation, who only cared about ourselves. And then, of course, you already see the millennials and Gen Xers starting to pile up, and poor Gen Z saying oh, you just sit there on TikTok dancing all day. All of these are the same vein, and they're all equally inaccurate. Most of the silents I know were never a beatnik. Most of the boomers I know were not long-haired hippie freaks. Most of the Gen Xers I know were not Beavis and Butthead by any stretch of the imagination, nor boomers nor millennials like myself, some sort of me-only generation. Just like the Gen Zs are not a whole bunch of TikTok-addicted dance people. It's been inaccurate since the beginning of time. So what do we do? What we do is, as community, we first claim dude, this is a multi-generational issue. And then it becomes our choice. Do we continue to spread the trauma from generation to generation by judging the youngest generation at any given moment by caricatures of who they are, of not understanding how they are moving forward the kingdom of God? Do we make the same mistakes our parents did? Or do we decide to stop? Stop the generational hate. Stop the picking of one generation upon the other. And congratulate each generation for moving the torch a little further forward, to working with God to make the world a better place. Congratulate each generation for doing the hard work of making parenting both better and harder. So as you go out today, take a few minutes in your life. I got 2 questions I want you to pray about this week in particular. First one, have you taken a whole bunch of voices out there and heard these voices and declared yourself lazy when maybe you're overworking? Are you letting voices in the past, maybe even those who've passed away, push you to not have the Sabbath you deserve, the Sabbath you need, the Sabbath God calls you to do? If so, take some time. Claim your priorities and claim how you have made the world a better place, and claim your rest. because you deserve it. 2, if you find yourself going, well, that generation, whether or not looking towards the older or towards the younger, stop yourself for a second and ask yourself, is that really true? Is it really true of everybody? Or am I just going with a quick caricature because I don't really understand the life of someone who came before or someone who came after? Amen.